Hello. Today we will discuss about the land, its supply and management for housing development. We have already talked about the land, how important it is to create large amount of housing. So, it is very important to have a discussion on the its process for supply, its assembly and its disposal. So, for this subject, we start from the discussion where we identified the key barriers or key problems which were the reason for not achieving the housing for all. These are the major concerns. Out of that we discussed that housing affordability, availability of the land, speedier technology and system, institutional and policy framework which we discussed last day, and building materials, skilled and unskilled labor and standards, norms and schedules. So, out of that this particular item we discussed last day, that policy and legal framework and institutional framework we have already discussed. So, today we are going to discuss the issue of land. So, for this these are the essential elements to cover, to discuss about the land and its supply. So, first is the concept of land cover and land use. Second is the how the land value works, what is the dynamics of land value in a urban system or urban areas, and then some ideas about the land tenure and rights, and lastly how the land supply and its managements are covered. So, today we will just mention the land supply, whereas next lecture we will discuss more about the land supply. So, land cover and land use both are used frequently. Land cover basically is the natural cover over the earth's surface. It may be water, it may be vegetation, green area, agricultural area. So, these are land cover, and land use basically represents the man made elements. For example, when we build townships, when we build infrastructure or housing, all those becomes the man made elements which we call it land use. So, land cover is existing and land use is kind of futuristic. So, that is the basic difference. So, land cover data documents how much a region is covered by forest, wetlands or impervious surfaces, agriculture and other land and water types, everything. And land use shows how people use the landscape, use the land for their development, conservation and also mixed uses. So, land cover and land uses typologies can be different based on the context and based on the geographical region. Now, how we define land? Basically, land is the most important resources which is limited, it cannot be created. We basically cannot create land in a bulk scale except few parcel of land which is reclaimed from some sea land or some river banks, but those are not a substantial substitute for land as required for the urbanization. So, by and large land cannot be created, it is a limited resource and very important resource. Then not only that, the water, air and other resources like green vegetation which is tied within the with the land, that is another important feature. The land provides the living spaces with primary products like agriculture or mining. These are the resources which a land parcel offers. Then land is such a precious resource. Frequent wars were fought between people, in which we have seen in the history, and even right now if you see the major conflicts nationally and internationally, the most of the wars occurred due to the right for the land. And land takes a very important role in the production. It is the key factor, its quality of the land is the key factor in the production. So, right of land basically determines the social status and the status of the security for any particular person or any community or sometimes the nation. So, it is the basically input for any infrastructure development, in township development, for creating a values, to add a value for a urbanization. And conversion of land is inevitable because population is increasing and it is ever increasing. With the increased urbanization, we cannot avoid the conversion of the land. So, conversion of land is inevitable. The challenge is how we can convert the land, keeping the concept of sustainability, keeping the concept of sustainability of the region and the land cover and land and the green and this environment. That is the challenge that we will deal in the coming lectures. And overall sprawl in the urban center makes land a scarcely commodity, because the cities are growing from small to medium, medium to large, large to very large. Nowadays, like in India, we have more than 50 metro cities and many mega cities. So, it is growing outward and sprawls are being created, and these are happening due to the invasion over the land without any control, without any planning intervention. That is why these many elements and the factors are very, very important to consider before going into further discussion on land assembly. So, we categorize land uses when we make the township or we make a new new infrastructure development, we make the we categorize the land uses in different category, and not only that, we also use specific color combination for different type of land use. For example, residential, it may be very faintly readable, may not be readable, it is residential, usually we show it by yellow, industrial by purple, and cultural, institutional and educational, sometimes we write as public, semi-public area, which we show by red color, and commercial with blue colors, and transportation with grey. Transportation includes the transportation terminal and roads, railway tracks, everything. And here the recreational open space and water body, like the overall city level recreational open space, which can be used for the public purpose. So, this is shown in dark green, whereas urban agriculture is shown as in light green, and sometimes service and utilities are also shown for the city with the respective color code, which is a little brownish color. So, now this is the urban land use categories. By and large, we show the major land use in a city plan. I will show the example how we show the land use in a gross land use pattern. So, there is a concept of gross land use and net land use. Before I go to the example, let me discuss that part also. So, gross land use and basically net land use refers to only the specific plot area under use. For example, if we speak about the residential area, so net residential plots, net residential lands which is utilized for the residential purpose, that is called net residential land use. Okay. Whereas, if we add with this net area like the essential local roads, local green areas, green or recreational areas, and local facilities. So, when we add this becomes the gross land use and this becomes the net land use. Therefore, if the net land use, if we consider as N and G, so G is always greater than N, because the gross land use includes the local level facilities like local roads, local green and recreational spaces, local facilities like convenience shops and the education and health facility at the local level, which is accessible by the people within easy reach by walkable distance. So, this is the land use category. So, let us now see an example how land use is represented in a overall city plan. So, this is the land use map of city of New Delhi. This is taken from Delhi master plan. You can see the land use category here. The yellow represents the gross residential area. That means, if you take a zoom in of this area, we will see that within this area there will be all these local roads, local green areas, local facilities. So, these are the transportation areas, represent the road and everything. Blue and red, the color code mentioned here, red as commercial, whereas the color code shown earlier represent basically URDPFI standards, that is urban development, urban and regional plan formulation guidelines. It is by government of India, Ministry of Urban Development, but somehow they have adopted a little different color code. So, they have adopted the red color for the commercial areas and blue color for the public semi public areas, here blue color. So, whatever, but the basic principle of showing the land use is similar, that is the gross land use they have shown, and this greens are the city level recreational area. Now, if you see this development of this city, it was a small city in the center, and slowly it grew outwards towards west, towards south and towards east, and even beyond this boundary there are huge development like Noida, Greater Noida and all those areas. So, with the land use, one very important concept is the land value, how land value acts with the growth of the city. Now, it has been seen that if this is the city core or the central business district, in the city core the land value is highest, and more you go towards the city periphery, the land value will decrease gradually with the distance. So, land value is a very important criteria for to determine the future urbanization land space. So, technically the land value varies with this distance from the center. If this is the center of the city and more you go towards the periphery of the city, the land value decreases. So, land value is maximum at the city core for retail, commercial, industrial, commercial, and multiple family house, that is group housing, and then single family housing, then agriculture. But whatever is the category of the land value, it will be maximum at the center, and more you go towards the outwards, it will gradually decrease. So, that is the dynamics of land value. It is very important, because when we make the housing strategy for a city, so we have to identify the pockets of the land where the land value is affordable, where the new housing can come in a affordable land value. So, for that reason the land value dynamics is very important to consider in a overall planning paradigm. Not only the land value, the land use is land value and land use is very well connected with the transportation and accessibility, and it is interlinked. We will see how this is very important for the housing development to understand, to plan a housing project or a housing strategy for a city. The concept of land and transportation cycle is very important. Now, we start from this point. We have talked about the land cover and land use. When we assign a particular land use for a particular land parcel, so it becomes a land use, and land use, for example, it is a residential land use. So, if it is residential land use, the housing, new housing, with the new housing the trips will be generated. Trips is nothing but the unit of transportation, a single movement from one place to another place. For example, the one trip can be there for the house to job or job to house. So, once the land use is assigned and the area is developed as per the residential or whatever the land use, the trips are generated. When the trips are generated, then it generates the transportation needs. There will be need for the bus service, train service, local transport service, and when we provide those kind of service, the transport facility will be improved. Transport facility will improve the accessibility of this area, and this accessibility will increase the land value, and when the land value is will increase, it will add more dense land use, more compact land use, and more compact land use will generate more population will generate more trips, and vice versa. So, this is a very important cycle to understand the dynamics between the land use, the trips and the transportation and the land value. So, this will help us when we make the strategy for a city, when we make the housing strategy for a city, that time it will be required. Okay. Now, let us have a quick discussion on the property right. Land is also a considered as a property, it is which is immovable property and is very important property in terms of development, and not only the property and asset is also ensure the social security for the poor people. So, who owns the land, they are more secured in the society. So, land the property right is the exclusive authority to determine how a resource is used, whether that resource is owned by the government or by individual. So, this particular authority to use exclusively have different dimensions, like the right to use the particular good, here the good means land, whether you are able to use that or not. Right to earn income, whether you are able to earn income in terms of selling it out or renting it out, that is also another important part. Right to transfer the good to others, whether you are able to transfer the good from your ownership to another ownership, and also right to enforcement of the property rights, whether you are able to enforce any rules regulation associated with the land. Especially when we talk about the land as a property, you will see that our objective will be to use to earn income, to in terms of the recovery or the benefit, to transfer, and also to enforce legitimate building regulations control, so that a homogeneous and better development is ensured. So, now let us see the category of the ownership. We have basically various types of ownership: private ownership, group or community ownership, public or government ownership, and which can be open access, it is not owned by anybody. So, in private sectors or private people, individual person can own a land, here a group or community. For example, let us take the example to understand in a better way how a private land. So, private land can be owned by any private party, any private person or any company. The group ownership of land can be owned by any housing cooperative or land cooperative or some trustee or some residents association. Public land can be owned by the government, like the national park, roads, the city level bigger recreational green areas, which is owned by the public authority, like either central government, state government, or the local government. And also there are elements like ocean or the ocean fishery and the common property, common earth surface, which is not owned by any particular private group or public, but it is common, it is basically owned by the everybody. So, it is open access property. So, private property, when land is a private property, it is controlled by basically owner. The government or any other third person may not cannot control it, but government has limited power to use those power in terms of acquire and to control that land. That will come slowly how it can be controlled, but government, it is by and large it is controlled by the owner. It is a group property, it is controlled by the joint owners of the, as a group, as a owner they control. And when it is a national or the state property, government property, it is controlled by the state. State means government, any government, and it is basically uncontrolled. Okay. Now, what are the factors which influences land supply? Now, these are the factors which influences land supply. Why it is very important to discuss, because unless we know this, we cannot understand the dynamics of land supply and the economics and the science of land supply, how it is generated and assembled at the ground. So, let us see one by one. The first is the its type and category of the ownership, the ownership category and size. For example, if it is a privately owned land, it is a government owned land or group owned land, its dealing will be different. The government owned land, government can do any development work anytime. If it is a private owned land, either government can acquire them for the public purpose, or if they cannot acquire or the acquisition is not required, they can impose some control, impose some specific rules and regulation over the land. So, it depends the ownership on the ownership of the land. If the size is very small, like say 500 square meter or 400 square meter, a big project cannot be done. So, it may not be taken as for a bigger public purpose like say industry, but if the land is very big or the small persons can be clubbed together to acquire like say big hectares or acres of land, that can be acquired for the public purpose if required for the industry or for the future infrastructure development or for the housing projects. And government control like land use, change of ownership, whatever the government controls is prevalent in that particular place, it also influences the land supply. If the government control is very stringent, then land supply is very less for the bigger projects. I talked about few lectures back that about the land ceiling and regulation act. Those kinds of acts basically makes a stringent paradigm where the land conversion and assembly of bigger land parcel is very difficult. So, it is also important that whether government legal setup, legal framework is is friendly to assemble bigger amount of land or not. So, it depends on the government control. Then relative location, I talked about the land value which is decreasing when the distance from the CBD increases. The more you go from the city center towards the boundary, towards the outskirts, the land value decreases. So, it is also important part. Then effectiveness of systems and processes and land transaction, like in the government, each government, I told you last lecture that each government has the land registration department. So, the process of land registration take a specific process, specific time, some financial requirement, and this process can be long duration, it can be short duration. So, if a government is very effective and delegates or execute such transaction in a very quicker time, so definitely the land transaction and land assembly will be very quicker and more in number. So, it depends on the effectiveness of the system. And then last but not least, the regional planning and policies and urban planning and policies is very important. The policy related to land, especially the zoning of the land, where the future urbanization will come and take place and where the future urbanization will not come and will not take place, and which are the land which will keep conserved for the agricultural purpose. So, in a regional planning perspective and the policies, this will tell us about the specific land use regulation in a regional context. So, these are the factors which affecting or influencing the land supply in an urban area. So, now let us summarize. We discussed the land is a very important element in housing development. Without discussing the basis of the land supply, we cannot go to the other units like finance or technology or any other planning matters. So, because of the population increase, population is ever increasing, and because of the population increase, urbanization is inevitable to come and land conversion is inevitable. So, that urbanization converts the land cover to specific land use. Now, the challenge is how we can specify the land use in a scientific way, in a sustainable way for the future. Then land uses are represented through different categories and colors. We discussed like residential, commercial, institutional or public semi public, then industrial, then green recreational area including water bodies, then agricultural, urban agricultural area, transportation and the utilities. So, every land use has their different color codes and we use by the color. And not only that, we discussed about the gross land use and net land use, where we discussed the net land use represents only net plot area under the use, and when you add the local areas like local roads, local green and recreational area, local facilities, with that it becomes the gross land use. So, gross land use is always bigger than the net land use, and in land use plan for a city we basically show the gross land use, not the net land use. However, when you do the local level plan for making housing development, definitely we have to see the net land use, so that we can have a estimate of actual land availability at that particular place. Land value is influenced by the distance from the CBT. More you go towards the periphery, towards the outwards, the land value decreases, and depending on that the pockets generated in the outwards which have better connectivity, but little lower land value is the prospective areas for future urban development or future housing development. That we will see in the next lecture how that dynamics occur and what are the prospective land assembly mechanism. And not only that, land value has the direct relation with the connectivity and city profile. We have seen that land value is increased when the connectivity increases, and connectivity increased when the more population and population pressure is increased, and more population pressure is increased when the new land use is assigned and housing is developed, and when the new land use is assigned when there is a increase of land value and prospective future urbanization. So, it is a cyclic order by which every element like land value, land use and connectivity is connected. Then scientific land management systems are required to get the benefit of planning for housing. So, we need specific scientific management of land supply, because otherwise the normal tendency of the common people is to develop new housing with or without planning intervention, or with or without the basic infrastructure. So, in the next lecture we will see that if we do the land management, what happens, if you do not do the land management, what happens, and for land management what are the basic categories, basic methods of land management, how we can assemble the land, what are the methods and what are the pros and cons, benefits and advantage and disadvantage of all those methods, and which are to be used for our own purpose. So, next lecture we will discuss that part, the land management and land supply for housing specifically in next lecture. Thank you.